What are the 6 most common causes of a herniated disc? That's the topic tonight. A lot of people have herniated discs and want to know what happened. Why do I have them? So first we're going to do a little anatomy lesson. Typical spine has 24 vertebrae. The head would be here. Obviously the hips are here. Between the head and the hips there are 24 vertebrae. That's a lot. And between each vertebrae there is a disc. The disc allows for motion of the vertebrae. Each vertebrae moves in 6 directions: forward, back, side to side, and rotate. And all that motion takes place on top of the disc. The disc is a lot like a jelly donut in the sense that the outside of the disc, there's a thick material we call the annulus, and inside the disc there's a jelly-like substance. And the jelly gives stability to the disc. The jelly gives stability to the disc the same way air gives stability to your tire. When the air has the proper amount, when the tire has the proper amount of air, the tire is stable. If the tire runs out of air, we call that a degenerated disc, because the nucleus tends to dry out, and what happens is the vertebrae get closer together. But for this story today, we're talking about the herniated disc. And what happens with a herniated disc is you get a tearing very often in the annulus, the outer portion, and then the nucleus starts to push in that direction, and then the outer portion of the annulus pushes out, causing the herniated disc. So what happens is you get a tearing of the nucleus, tears through the outside, and the nuclear material starts to push in that direction very often, causing the nucleus to push out into the spinal canal area and pinching the nerve. Looks just like this. Mostly looks like this, but this is the nuclear material pushing to the outside, causing the herniated disc. That's the herniated disc. Kind of looks like this from the top view. So the top view would be this view here, just like this. This would be the disc. This would be the spinal cord as we're looking at it right here, and the nucleus starts to push out just like this. And as that nucleus pushes out, sometimes it'll pinch that nerve, but certainly it'll cause a lot of pain. And if it pinches that nerve, as that nerve exits the spinal cord, very often you have pain that goes down the leg, and you can have a herniated disc in your neck, which will cause you pain into your arms. Now, there are 6 main reasons that you can have a herniated disc. And the number one reason, it might be the most common reason, is what we call a trauma. Now, I suffered a back injury in the 80s that some of you know about because it kind of led to why we do what we do at the Illinois Back Institute. But I jumped off a cliff. And when I jumped off a cliff, I jumped off an 80-foot cliff, and when it has to be memorable. But it's the overloading of the disc from the trauma that causes the nuclear material to migrate to the outside, typically through what we call the fissure or the tearing of the annulus. But there are other reasons you can have trauma. Some people say, you know what, I fell down the stairs, or I fell out of bed, or I slipped and fell on the ice. We treat a lot of football players, a lot of sports injuries, a lot of former NFL guys that played with the Chicago Bears in 1985, a couple of Hall of Famers. But what happens in football, there's a lot of trauma. A lot of trauma smashing the spine. Here's another one. Car accidents. Typical car accident, and football is like car accidents, but we get all the professional athletes. But car accidents like this. Spine does that. They call it whiplash, but the spine does that, and as that happens, it overloads the discs. And with that overloading of the discs, very often what can happen is that nuclear material can migrate, you get tearing of the annulus, and the nucleus migrates to the outside. So we talked about the football players, all the traumas they have, but that's the number one. It tends to be the most common. Not the only reason, again, there are 6. Another one is what we call repetitive stress, kind of a wear and tear. And what happens with a wear and tear is you start to load the disc, overloading the disc. A lot of motion on the disc causes a decrease of flow. When you get that decrease of flow into the nucleus, you start to overstress the annulus. And when you overstress the annulus very often will start to develop little tears. Okay, but as that nucleus starts to dry out from the wear and tear, okay, bending, lifting, twisting, bending, lifting, twisting. We treat a lot of postal workers, a lot of electricians, a lot of laborers. Okay, what it does over time is it causes the discs to start to break down. And as that starts to break down, you end up getting that little tear, and that tear and then allows for that nucleus to migrate all the way to the outside. Here's a herniated disc right here. Nucleus has migrated to the outside of the spine. That's the herniated disc. Wear and tear. Very common. We did a video the other day. The number 2 reason how to avoid it, well, it was bending. It's how to bend proper, because when you bend and you lift things the wrong way, you overload the disc. A lot of herniated discs happen when people bend forward and then they twist. Okay, the bending forward is what we call flexion. Flexion overloads the disc. How much stress is on the disc is important. The stress, the load on the disc is important, but the angle of the load. Is it equal in all directions? Are the muscles holding in all directions, or are the muscles going out of balance? Very, very important. The load on the disc over time. Another reason is what we call posture, or poor posture, okay? The spine is designed such that there are 3 curves. I just gave my guy whiplash, so his curves are all out of whack, but curves in, curves out, curves back in, just like this, 3 curves, okay? And in this position right here, the center of gravity goes right through the middle of the spine. When the center of gravity goes right through the middle of the spine, the stresses are distributed evenly in all directions on the annulus. And when the stresses are distributed evenly in all directions on the annulus is healthier. But what happens is people tend to lean forward. You develop a little bit of a forward lean over time. And you know, it's real common right now where people are getting this forward lean where their head's leaning forward because of all the texting. We're texting, we're sitting in our computer, we're working with our laptops, working with our tablets, but we got our head forward and we're looking down just like this. That causes a forward lean. And what they found is when you have a 1-inch forward lean, so when you're 1 inch off neutral, the center of gravity now is in front of the spine, and the center of gravity in front of the spine from a 1-inch forward lean loads the discs at the base of your spine, L4 and L5, by 4 times normal. And when you load the disc by 4 times normal in the lowest part of your spine, you can develop a herniated disc. So your posture, believe it or not, your posture is a main contributor to the herniated discs because of the change in the load. The change in the load over time causes a breakdown. Another one is what we call deconditioning syndrome. Deconditioning syndrome is when the muscles go out of balance. The stresses need to be even from front to back and side to side. And what happens very often is the muscles in your back get tight. These muscles back here get tight, and the muscles that do the opposite activity in the front, the stomach muscles, get weak. When the muscles in the front and the back get tight, there's a nervous system communication pattern from the muscles in the back to the muscles in the front, causing the muscles in the front to turn off. It's called reciprocal inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition changes the amount of muscle tension. And when you change the load and the muscle tension on the discs over time, what happens? Muscles go out of balance, the discs start to break down. And as the discs start to break down, then you'll develop the herniated disc. That's the 4th reason. The 5th reason is what we call degenerated discs. Degenerated discs are where the discs start to dry out. And when the discs start to dry out, what it does is it changes the pressure on the disc above, and it changes the pressure on the disc below. And when you change the pressure on the disc above and the disc below, it adds more load, and that load will start to cause the nucleus to migrate to the outside and cause a tearing in the annulus. And when the annulus tears, we know the nucleus will migrate out and cause the herniated disc. That's the 5th reason. The last one is what we call failed back surgery syndrome. Failed back surgery syndrome is when you have a surgery that doesn't work. And it's not uncommon that people get the fusion surgery, and what they do is they fuse the vertebrae together. So what they do is they put rods and screws in the back to hold everything into one place. That's called a fusion. It's the most advanced sort of traumatic surgery you can have in your spine. But the fusion, it locks everything in place. And when you lock everything in place, what it does is it loads the disc above and below. It's called above and below syndrome. And when you load those discs, because now they have to bear the weight because the other vertebrae aren't doing what they should be doing as far as the motion, then these discs start to break down. And as these discs start to break down, you'll start to develop herniated discs. So those are the 6 reasons you can have a herniated disc. Our goal is to prevent it by having you do the right thing, but if you have a herniated disc and you're not getting better, we can treat the herniated disc. Our program is specifically designed to reverse the process of the herniated disc. This is MRIs of a patient of ours. This is his herniated disc, went through some therapy, got a little bit better. At the end, his herniated disc was completely gone. Okay? We have the ability to eliminate the herniated disc. If you like what you hear, we want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Twitter. We go live every day. Today's Thursday. Tomorrow we're gonna do more videos, so we'll be live again tomorrow. So that's it for today. Hope this was helpful. And if you have a herniated disc that's not going away, you can click on the links and you can give us a call. Have a good night. Good night.